The international system is facing accelerated transitions as competition between the great powers intensifies. Join this important dialogue with the Kingston Consortium on International Security.
I am very honored to announce our final keynote speaker, and I'm going to quickly introduce the moderator for this session, Professor Stephen Saideman, Director of the Canadian Defence and Security Network. Sir, the floor is yours.
It's my pleasure, my honor to moderate this last session. I'm not going to spend a lot of time introducing our speaker. He's well known to all of us. I will say that he's a big fan of KCIS. I first met General Eyre at the KCIS, I want to say in 2019. He was Chief of the Army and fresh from his mission in Korea. And so he will speak, and then afterwards I will try to ask him the peskiest questions I can. And then we'll open it up to the audience for questions, so hopefully we'll have a good conversation. And we're the last panel, so this is going to go till probably 4, 5, 6 o'clock. So save your ammunition. We're looking forward to a really great conversation. The General, the floor is yours.
Hey, Steve, thank you for that thankfully short introduction. C'est fantastique à voir tout le monde ici, and I'm very excited to get through this speech and then get to the important parts of the discussion, because I look forward to learning from you as much as you learn from me. So it's great to be back here at KCIS and talking to you, the people who understand the importance of defending Canada, defending our values, defending our way of life. It's also great to see the number of students that are out in the audience here as well, because I believe our country suffers from a lack of intellectual investment in international defense and security issues, and we need more who are part of the conversation, because our world, as I'm going to get to, is becoming increasingly more dangerous, and our place in the world, our way of life is under threat, and we need people who can think deeply about the implications and what to do about it. You know, as Steve mentioned, it's not my first time here. I'm a big fan of this event. This is my 5th time speaking to you. You know, I do have some connections with the sponsoring organizations. You know, the Center for International Defense Policy here at Queen's, the Canadian Army Doctrine and Training Center, U.S. Army War College, the Strategic Studies Institute, and the NATO Defense College. I've been through CAT-DC courses, graduate of the U.S. Army War College. In fact, one of your speakers this morning, Tony Echeverria, was my faculty sponsor down in Carlisle. So, put a plug in for his works. His books are great. And my wife is a graduate of Queen's. In fact, as we're driving up here, I was pointing out to the vehicle, Victoria Hall, where she used to live. Yeah, so some connections. Hey, the theme of this session, of this event, very, very timely, because I firmly believe that the character of war is rapidly changing. So what you've studied, what you've discussed, is immensely relevant at this moment in history that we find ourselves. You know, these are dangerous times that threaten our stability, our peace, our way of life, and our national prosperity. And we've got to be laser-like focused on these changes, because our safety, our security, and the ideals that we cherish so much, freedom, democracy, the rule of law, human rights, the dignity of every individual, they're under threat. And our rules-based international order, the foundation that was put in place in 1945 to prevent great power conflict, that's under threat as well. And with that under threat, the stability and security of our world is uncertain. So we've got some challenges in front of us. Challenges from competitors who would replace it with a less kind, more authoritarian system that would value power over justice, repression over freedom, and domination over democracy. But we also live in times of accelerated change, change that is seeing the confluence of a number of disruptors. And so this global security environment that we're in, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it, it keeps me up at night. And our capacity to respond to what seems to be a nonstop series of crises keeps me up, because I believe we're at a turning point, a turning point for the world. The last 30 years, from 1990 to 2020, what we could call a unipolar moment in world history, with a single superpower, some would call hyperpower, that's over. And history has returned. So this needs to be a turning point for the Canadian Armed Forces as well. And it's a turning point in the character of war. So that's why this conference is so important. And how we respond to that changing character, how we respond to the plethora of threats out there, is going to determine the kind of world that we live in, and the kind of world that our children and grandchildren are going to live in. So what I'm going to do is take a few minutes to talk about the broader context of the threats that we face out there, and then focus on that changing character before we open up to questions. So to simplify it, I see a confluence of four threats, or four challenges in the security environment: geopolitical, climate change, technological change, and societal change. And these four stressors, if you will, are going to interact in unpredictable permutations and combinations. And so the future is pretty uncertain. So firstly, the geopolitical. And I'm going to color this with some commentary over a number of engagements I've had in the very recent past, including as recently as yesterday. So this is the disruptor that's perhaps the greatest threat to our rules-based international order, where we've got the revival of strategic competition, confrontation, and the specter of conflict between great powers. Russia, with its illegal and brutal invasion of Ukraine, is acting like the rules-based international order doesn't exist. And despite its setbacks, it is still a potent force. Despite its army being chewed up, the other domains are intact. The vast majority of its Air Force is intact. Its Navy, with the exception of part of its Black Sea fleet, is intact. Cyber capabilities intact, and most space capabilities intact. And most scary of all, its strategic nuclear forces are still capable. NATO and its cohesion now, well, it's pretty inspiring to see. And this conflict has underscored the importance of this great transatlantic alliance. So this weekend, I was in Oslo for the NATO Chiefs of Defense Conference. And every conversation that we had was underscored by what was happening in Ukraine and our response to it. Whether it's the what's called the DDA family of plans, so the defense and deterrence in the Euro-Atlantic area, whether it's industrial mobilization, whether it's some of the sidebar discussions we had about who is supporting who with what exercises, it was all in the context of increased tension. And having been at that table prior to this round of invasions, it's heartwarming to see just the cohesion that is happening in that group. And while we've been much horrified by Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the brutality there, perhaps even more dangerous to global security is the instability in the Indo-Pacific region. While we see Russia undermining the rules-based international order, China is employing every tool at its disposal, including military posturing, coercive diplomacy, malicious cyber activity, espionage, theft of intellectual property and sensitive technologies. And we've seen it in the media trying to hire our own retired members through the corrosive and corruptive effect of money to create a new system in its image. And their aim is by 2049, the 100th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China, to take what it believes to be its rightful place as the center of a multipolar world. Now, while it has not engaged in full-scale war like Russia has, it's becoming increasingly aggressive in the international domain, including with the use of military force. And our estimate is that Xi is becoming much more risk-tolerant as he wants to achieve certain objectives in his lifetime. So this activity has heightened tensions in the Indo-Pacific, most notably in the South and East China Seas. Where given its way, China would have exclusive control. It's interesting, about a month ago I was at the Indo-Pacific Chiefs of Defense Conference, and the theme of the conference was upholding the rules-based international order in the region. And China was there, so my Chinese counterparts. So it was interesting to hear their perspective, how rules are very, very important, but national interest has to trump rules. So it just made me wonder if we're on the same planet or not. And that's part of the challenge as well, is we talk past each other. So having that deep understanding of where the other side is coming from. And that's something I don't think that we have enough of in understanding the strategic culture of adversaries. I'm going to go a little bit off script here, but hey, we had this in the Cold War. The Kremlinologists who had deep understanding of Russia. I don't see the same thing with China right now, and that has really atrophied with respect to Russia as well. And so understanding the adversary is important. Change gears and talk about the Arctic. Let's go up there. Emerging zone of heightened tension. So climate change is rapidly transforming the Arctic and the northern landscape. It's warming at a much faster rate than the rest of the world. And as the sea ice recedes, the perception and the fact of accessibility and access to resources up there is just going to increase the interest. And where there's interest, where there's resource extraction, means there's potential for military buildup and confrontation. And so with greater interest, heavier traffic, there's that increased risk of miscalculation and missteps. And this is one that Canada nor the rest of the world can afford. Both Russia and China harbor Arctic ambitions with obvious implications for us. Russia as an Arctic state perceives the North to be vital to its economic and national security interests, especially as there's an increased amount of traffic going through the Northern Sea route. And so they're heavily investing in Arctic infrastructure and military capabilities and their own A2AD, anti-access aerial denial capabilities along the Northern Sea route. China, as a near Arctic nation, whatever that means, is advancing its own Polar Silk Road initiative and as a key component of its strategic interests in the region. They're doing a lot of so-called research in the area. In fact, as we speak, the Chinese research ship, the Zhuilong 2, is on its way back from doing research. Our estimate is the Chinese have a much better idea of a much better map of the ocean floor up there than we do. Yeah, it's good for scientific research. It's also good for submarines as well. And we're seeing, as Russia becomes more of a vassal to China, subservient in some cases, they are conceding to China access and other interests in the Arctic. And this historically was a potential wedge issue between the two, but we're seeing much more cooperation. On Monday, again up in Oslo, we had the Arctic Chiefs of Defense Conference. And that was, again, fascinating, especially getting the Norwegian intelligence view of the situation. So as we're seeing some pretty expansive territorial claims from Russia, and as they increase presence, increase military capability, the sense is that they may be learning from what China did in the South China Sea with almost the boiling the frog concept, building up A2AD capabilities. And in the decade and decades to come, we may be presented with a fait accompli as we have these overlapping territorial disputes. So it's a threat that we need to be alive to. They're also putting a great deal of effort into the global South, working together, exerting influence in Africa, in the Middle East, and in South America. Yesterday morning, I hosted U.S. Commander Southcom, Southern Command, up in Ottawa. We had a meeting and discussed just that. We have very little military capacity, not that to engage there, not that Many of the countries want Western military engagement, but we have to be very mindful that both Russia and China are investing heavily in terms of influence in that area. And we see that with respect to a lot of the narrative and the beliefs around Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And so, the global south is another area of competition. You throw into the mix Iran and North Korea, instability, destabilizers in their own right. A couple violent extremist organizations, transnational terrorism, that has not gone away. So geopolitically, we're in for a rough ride. Climate change, yeah, it's real. And facing that climate change with the geopolitical threat is going to be a threat multiplier. It's not just the increased frequency and intensity of natural disasters. I do have to say that just last week we finished 131 days straight of military deployments in this country to fight wildfires. It is affecting our readiness. It is affecting our ability to respond. We're being called upon more and more to do it. But if we take a look at drivers around the world, it is driving human migration. It is driving conflict. So it's going to be a key component of conflict going forward. Reading an interesting book right now. It's called The Earth Transformed by Peter Frankopan, about small changes in climate and what that has done to human development over the course of the last 100,000 years. Well, we're in for a lot of that coming forward because those changes in our global climate are happening more and more frequently. So it's going to greatly stress our security environment. Societal change. So we're seeing some pretty seismic changes in our society. Demographic changes are challenging populations and policymakers as some societies are growing older, birth rates are down, and other societies are becoming much younger, and all are becoming much more urbanized. We see cultural conflicts, the culture wars, and political polarization tearing at our social cohesion. That social cohesion, those institutions of liberal democracy that make our country strong and resilient in many countries in the West. And this is having an impact on our security environment as well. And this discord is being fueled by online activity sponsored and amplified by hostile actors. And finally, I guess the last one we'll talk about is technological change. The acceleration in technological change is unlike what we've seen before. It is just speeding up. Autonomous systems, quantum, biotechnologies, these all have the potential to radically change our societies and the way we conduct war. But they've also got enormous potential to improve efficiencies, enhance decision making, and just make us better as well. And China has got a stunning lead in many of these technologies. Something we need to be very worried about. So to get to the meat, this is all affecting the character of war. But I have to emphasize, and this is very Clausewitzian, the nature of war does not change. It remains bloody, wrapped in fear, fog, friction, ruled by emotion, and subject to the play of chance and probability. And success is still often measured in geography taken from the enemy. Often, as we're seeing in Ukraine, in incremental amounts, just like it was in the muddy fields of Flanders and France in the First World War. The goal of war is still to destroy the enemy's will to fight, to make the toll of fighting or fighting on more devastating than the cost of capitulation. So despite advances in technology, wars are still going to be ones that involve large-scale battles that are neither short nor cheap, especially when we get into great power conflict. And tragically, in human terms, they are still going to be bloody. So as always, war remains a contest of human will. But the character is rapidly changing. So as it remains a contest of human wills, the ability to change those wills, to affect those wills, is rapidly changing on the home front. You are seeing the power of social media and the disinformation, misinformation that can engender, and how that can change the perceptions at home. That's going to be an important part of warfare. Geography remains the same, but our ability to conquer geography is rapidly changing. Hypersonic weapons are one example. Now, we here in Canada can no longer count on our splendid isolation as a reliable defensive strategy, as adversaries can much more rapidly reach out and touch us, and leaving us very little decision space to respond. The integration of new technologies, while that is a constant, that is going to have to continue to evolve. In fact, I just came from Fort Frontenac, and I was talking to some Army Operations Course students about what they're learning on that course, the ability to integrate all arms. Well, as we integrate, as we develop these new technologies, the integration of those new technologies is going to be incredibly important, because that will change the character as well. And who can integrate the best? We may have the same technologies, but who can integrate the best is going to be more successful. We're seeing the power of the defense. Clausewitz talked about this as well. The power of the defense over the offense. This is very, I compare this to the wars, or the situation leading up to the First World War, where we saw a number of emerging technologies come to the fore. Machine guns, poison gas, barbed wire, the railway, telegraph, the tin can. All of these combined made the power of the defense much stronger than the power of the offense. And that's the operational problem of the 21st century, was the breakthrough of the defense in depth. Well, we're seeing, to use that analogy, we're seeing the same thing now, with many of these technologies making the defense much stronger. We saw that in Ukraine in the opening salvos, where Ukrainian defenders were able, Russia saw how difficult it was to conduct an offense. And conversely, we're seeing that right now with the Ukrainian counteroffensive, that despite the much greater morale of the Ukrainian forces, Russia is still able to use the power of the defense. You can see it in the concepts that are being developed, the A2AD, anti-access aerial denial, that China is using in the South China Sea, for example. But somewhat related, you can also see it, you can see how difficult it is to occupy a hostile population, or even one that is indifferent, or even one where most of the population supports you. And we saw that in Afghanistan. You saw that in Iraq. If you do what I've been increasingly calling security force substitution, the population is going to be, you're not going to have the same buy-in from the population. The population will eventually turn against it. And this is one lesson that we absolutely have to learn from our wars of intervention over the last quarter century. A couple of lessons from my perspective from Ukraine, which is perhaps the first truly digital war. So networked, integrated command and control is critical. And I think General Arrington talked to you earlier about the Security Assistance Group Ukraine and some of the work that is happening there. But we have seen Ukrainians with great innovation bolting digital command and control onto legacy systems to great effect, and combining artificial intelligence, networking, human-machine pairing to obtain high-quality, high-speed information. We're seeing autonomous systems being used. We're seeing the power of 3D printing and just how that reduces sustainment tails and increases the ability to manufacture spare parts. Ramped up battlefield awareness is becoming more effective, faster with decision making. Signature management is also pretty key here, and as well as dispersed operations. They've become critical. So if you can be seen, you can be targeted. If you can be targeted, you can be killed. And so the battle of signatures is going to be something that's incredibly important for the character of war. And it's going to be in all domains: maritime, air, land, space. So what that means in terms of our ability to respond is we have to be more dispersed, we have to be more networked, and we have to be more digitally enabled to retain advantage over adversaries. Victory will also hang on finding the right balance between mass and precision of legacy systems and some of the latest technology, and find a way to integrate the two. We've traditionally, and the West has traditionally been built, militaries have been built around small numbers of large, expensive platforms. And we've seen this over the course of the last 50 years. But the economics of war are going to be such that we're going to have to change that mindset, and we're going to have forces that are built around larger numbers of smaller, cheaper, expendable, and autonomous systems. And so mass through that are still precise, but don't nearly cost as much. And we realize this in Afghanistan as well. You know, a $2 million missile to take out a Taliban in flip-flops and an AK-47, that did not make a lot of sense. And so we've got to square the circle on that one. So these changes are all redefining warfare in the 21st century and beyond. And we've got to ask ourselves how far-reaching these changes are going to be. You know, only time will tell, but we've got to be on top of it. For example, will artificial intelligence change the nature of war to the point that it's no longer a contest of human wills? Any science fiction fans out there? I know this guy is. Yeah. So yeah, HAL 9000, Skynet, you know, that might be things of science fiction, but hey, so we're communicators off of Star Trek. Now look at our cell phones. But we also got to realize that much about what we're talking about today, our troops that hit Juno Beach in 1944, if they looked at the technologies we had, they would call that science fiction as well. I want to wrap up here and get to Q&A, but I'll ask, how do we address these challenges? You know, how do we confront this convergence of turning points and confluence of stressors and emerge well-positioned to face the challenges of this century? What we can't do is hold on to the status quo. We can't rely on what has worked in the past, even if it's worked really, really well. We can't assume that our ways of doing business are the right ones. We've got to question everything with a sense of humility and open-mindedness. We've got to become less risk-averse. I tell you, this frustrates me, as we want to take more risk, and the bureaucracy just seizes up the gears. We've got to foster creativity and sometimes push the boundaries, often push the boundaries beyond our conventional comfort levels. And you know, essentially what we've got to do is ask our institution to do the same thing that we ask our people to do every time they deploy. And they are comfortable, we are comfortable in taking risk on operations. We understand that. Risk institutionally is a whole other thing. But it's absolutely required to embrace innovation. So that means putting a real value on experimentation, putting a real value on failure, embracing failure as a way to learn. Some of you have heard me quote the great philosopher, little green guy called Yoda, about failure being the best teacher. Well, it certainly is. It's the hard lessons are the ones you internalize. But I do think our people are up to it. I do think that we can do this. We are facing tremendous challenge and uncertainty in the years ahead. And our armed forces is that hedge against uncertainty. Our ultimate insurance policy, if you will. And it's going to be based on our people. And I tell you, I am inspired every time I go out and I talk to our people. Tuesday night, I was in Prestwick with our air task force that's delivering aid to Ukraine. And the team has just rotated in the last few weeks, but you could see the motivation. You can see, and I heard from them just how motivated they were to do this meaningful work. Every flight that they put in was allowing Ukraine to better defend its country. I remember some months ago talking to our trainers in the south of the UK, training young Ukrainian recruits, and young corporals and privates telling me that this was the most meaningful thing they have done in their life. Well, that sense of purpose, that sense of defending our country, that sense of doing something meaningful is going to help us survive and help us change and help us adapt and make this institution fit for purpose. They're proud of what they do, and I am proud of them. And I think with that, I'm going to wrap it up there and turn it over to Steve for my resistance to interrogation class.